well, welcome everybody to Node Nerds. I'm excited to be here with you guys. I know my fellow educators are excited to be with you today. Something that we're going to talk about today is essentially edge-to-edge patterns and how they work well or maybe don't work well for a quilt, and how we all go about choosing a pattern for a quilt. So I don't know who wants to start us off. We might as well just jump right into it, right? We've all been on the screen before. We know who we all are at this point, but who has some tips and tricks on how they choose a pattern for a quilt?
I'll start.
Okay, somebody.
Don't everybody jump in there at once.
Yeah.
I usually will take, if it's a quilt that's very geometric, so lots of straight lines, lots of boxes, then I pick patterns that are softer with softer lines and curves, lots of arcs, like the quilt behind me, which was pretty geometric. I used a simple wavy line. And if they're very applique heavy or lots of curves, lots of flowers, lots of pretty soft stuff, then I tend to go the other way, more geometric. That's just a rule of thumb. Of course, I break that rule all the time, but it's a way to get started. It's a way for me to start pulling patterns. I try not to do the thing where it's a flower quilt, so let's put flowers on it. I try to have the quilting somehow talk to the piecing. So maybe if it's a flower quilt, maybe we do leaves, or maybe we do, something that helps to somehow show off what the piecer has done, make the piecing look good so that the quilting looks good, right? We want them to look like they're from the same planet. I hate to see a quilt in a show. There's nothing worse than seeing a quilt in a show where it looks like the quilter was in one planet and the piecer was in another planet. And so I try to find something that has some sort of story and makes some sort of logical sense. But that straight line, curve line thing is a good trick.
So you focus more on the piecing itself, not necessarily the prints that they chose. Interesting. Okay. Does somebody else
sometimes
do the
if the print, if it's a real, yeah, sometimes I do that. Yeah.
Well, I want to second what Andy was saying, because the key is to find a non-descript pattern when you're often dealing with quilts that, let's say, like you mentioned, have flowers. It comes down to communication when you're quilting for others, because, they rely on us to make good suggestions, and that's probably one of the hardest things to learn when you're first starting out with your quilting. To learn what goes with what. But educating your clients is super important, I think. I would also choose leaves rather than a daisy flower, because there's daisies in the quilt, because the chances of, number one, finding a daisy that perfectly matches their daisies are pretty slim. And also the daisies that are in the quilt are going to get lost because way too many daisies now. But I also do go by what the fabrics are or the colors. If I don't know a client well, but I see this quilt that is full of polka dots and happy colors, I would probably want to suggest something that is happy in the design. Of course, finding out what type of person the quilt goes to sometimes can be a factor when choosing your designs, because on a masculine quilt, more than likely, they don't want anything frilly. They want something more masculine, or again, the nondescript patterns would work well. So you just really have to do a little detective work and find out first what where their mindset is. And I find the same goes also with scale when choosing your designs, because we have to explain what happens, what the outcome will be based on how the quilt's going to be used and the scale of the design. We're often at very different spectrums in our mindset when it comes to that.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up color. When you brought up color, my mind immediately went to, okay, is she going to start talking about thread? Where is she going with this? But you know, the more you started talking about the color and the mood of the quilt and what that brings, absolutely dictates the pattern that you put on. For example, I had a quilt that was teals, pink, some yellows. It was almost, I don't want to say it was juvenile, but it was more teeny bopper. I don't know, something about the colors that were chosen were just kind of for a preteen. And I told my client, I said, I don't know what your plan is for this quilt, but I envision it this high heel pattern. And I don't know, some of you have probably seen it. It was one of Gamel's free patterns that they had with the Statler. And I originally thought when I was flipping through, you know, looking at the patterns, I went, I'm never going to put high heel shoes. Never am I going to put high heel shoes on a quilt. And then the way that the fabric colors and some of the patterns spoke to me, it was like, I knew exactly when I saw the quilt what pattern I was going to put on it. So of course I asked my client before I just put it on and went with it, right? But she was thrilled with that pattern on it because it did just make sense. So when you brought up the color point, at first I was a little confused, but it absolutely makes sense how that can dictate the route you go.
And then I'm going to piggyback on something that Ava said when it comes to, you know, what is the quilt going to be used for, right? That communication. Is the quilt going to be a quilt that you just throw on the couch and snuggle up with, or is this going to be a, you know, wall hanging with an edge to edge on it? Okay. You know, choosing the right, scale and density makes a difference, right? For a quilt that you're going to, cuddle up with on the couch, you don't want dense quilting. You want more open quilting, so that way it's less stiff, right? Because the more quilting we put on, the stiffer those quilts get. Sort of in between what Ava and Doc said, sometimes quilts, the fabric in the quilts, they do speak to you, right? If you have a quilt that's flowery, right, you're going to put like a basic leaf design or something. But sometimes if you have a modern quilt that has like a lot of negative space in the background, you can choose a more complicated pattern, and that quilting will create a secondary effect in that negative space of the quilt, right? So you can be adding a element to your quilt by choosing the right edge to edge.
Absolutely. I think too, one of the things that I do is, I don't know if you guys have the clients that come and say, I don't know, you just pick. That in some ways, yeah.
All my clients.
It's fabulous, right? It's fabulous because you have that creative ability to put what you want on it, but at the same time, it's a little nerve-wracking because what I like might not be what they like. So if I get that, just put whatever you want on it, then my next immediate thing is, okay, how do you feel about feathers? How do you feel, so that I can get a sense of their style? Now, quilts will often have a sense of style, so that, like Ava said, you can start somewhere, right? So you can start with a modern for a modern, but if there's motifs that they don't like, I really don't like hearts. I try to drag that out of them, before I put anything on there that might not make their heart sing as much as it makes my heart sing.
Now, Vita, I saw you go, yep, me and my clients, they've let me do whatever I want. You love that? You like that?
I do.
Okay.
Now, but makes it hard when I have a new client. Like I have a new client who is a very traditional piecer. She loves the Civil War fabrics, and she has a list of things she does not like. Right. And she's very particular about things. Well, then I'm a nervous wreck. So the first few quilts that I did for her, I was like, is this too dense? Am I putting too much? Am I not putting enough? And so the very first thing I did was, because I wanted her business, and I wanted the opportunity to expand my repertoire by learning how to quilt these types of quilts, because that's not the type of quilt that I normally get. So the first thing I did was I was honest. This will be my first. We're going to have to communicate very openly about what it is that you like and don't like. I have a little notebook that I keep track of all of the quilts that I do and their information. So I have a page for this lady with a list of what she does not like, what she does like, what she was looking for, because then you get down the road when you actually load the quilt and you can't remember what they said. So I keep track of it. And then when I delivered it to her, I told her, I said, I'm not sure that I need you to be honest with me. Like, if there's not enough here, then I will take it back and we'll do more. Well, she lived with it for a couple of weeks and then she was like, yeah, I want a little bit more. So I took the quilt back and then I had to do some hand guiding to it, because once I had put in what I did digitally, it was hard to add to it digitally. So it pushed me even more. And I drew on things actually that I've been watching in our hand guided classes on tour from watching the other educators in order to finish that quilt for her. Then she was happy and she got a ribbon at the quilt show. So there was that. But, you know, communication, taking notes and asking them what they like. And with this particular client, she doesn't want any stitching that looks modern. So now I'm spending time researching like very traditional quilting so that I can try to mimic that look for her on her future quilts.
So I think I deal with my clients maybe a little, I shouldn't say deal with my clients, but I work with my clients maybe a little bit differently than some of you do. And I think that's because of my first experience when I brought a piece top to a quilter. When I brought my in, she said, okay, great, thanks, bye. I was not happy with that. I did not like that. It was my first time, right? And I had a lot of pride in my quilt because it was the first one that I did. And I wanted to have some kind of hands-on control. Not like Kayla to want control or anything, right? But I wanted a say in it because I felt like it was my project. So I was not thrilled with how that was handled. Was it beautiful at the end? Well, of course it was, but it didn't feel like completely mine. And I've had clients that have said, oh, I didn't really want to bring it to a long armor because I want to be part of the process start to finish. So when I meet my clients, I say, okay, here's the deal. Here's my book. Let's look through together. And I explain why I give them the option to do that. And I have my patterns printed so that they can look through. Now, that being said, about halfway through, they go, all right, just tell me what you would do. And then I can flip through and show them what I think would be best suited for their quilt. But I like to give them the option of having some kind of control over what will go on their quilt. Some of my quilter or my piecers don't like that at all. They say, give me 3 options and I'll pick from there. But some of them, they're taking time and looking through my whole book. So I guess that's a segue into my next question is, how do you, if you show your clients patterns, how do you go about doing that? Do you have things printed off? Do you email it to them? How do you do that?
Well, I have them send me a picture, preferably. And most people, I don't think I can think of one that wasn't able to do that of the quilt. And that's whether it's custom or edge to edge, same thing. So I can prepare, some patterns that I think would go with it. One thing we haven't mentioned in this process is trust. We have to establish trust. Especially when they're fairly new clients to us, they work really hard, and it's a whatever, special quilt for an occasion, and they don't know us from Adam. They can look at our pictures on social media, but that's really because it's not just about the type of quilting that we can do. It's about how they can relate to us because you're building a relationship that hopefully lasts for a really long time,
Yeah.
and so again, that's why I like for them to be involved and educate them. I like to educate them not only about the pattern choices, but how their batting choices affect the outcome of the quilt, the thread color, and something going back to what Doc said at the beginning of this segment, that when he said about you see the quilt at a show, for instance, and it has your name on it. There's nothing more frustrating than when you try to educate, I don't want to say warn a client, but essentially you try to warn them that this edge to edge on this stipple on this Baltimore album quilt will look horrendous in the color black thread. Of course, I'm exaggerating, but I've seen it to something like that, and it has your name on it, and you tried to warn them. Oddly enough, they loved it when they picked it up. But yeah, those are my least favorite clients because luckily I don't have any of those, but I have in the past. And it's really frustrating that they cannot envision, essentially it's their quilt, and what Kayla was saying about control. Um, I like control also, we all know that. But when it comes to the client, you know, it's their quilt. All I can do, as I said, is educate them and maybe even show them if I have examples of what the difference would look like and what it would feel like for them to understand, because I don't expect them to understand just by me choosing my words. So it can be challenging. And that's really, to me, a fun part of the process for them. Then they come and pick it up. And you are right, not because I have to be right, but because they recognized that, yeah, maybe I should listen sometimes because,
I think we're very lucky because our software allows us, like Ava said, to take that picture. Like if you can get a picture and you can import it in, then we're very lucky because we can audition different patterns right on top of that picture for them. And that's how I try to communicate with my clients sometimes, because we're so visual. We're really, really visual, and it's hard for them sometimes just to see a picture and say, well, what's the density? Like, what's the density on that? So if you can overlay it and they can see, how many of those flowers are actually going to fall within a certain block or whatever, then it's a lot more relatable in some senses. So I like to, once we get an idea of what they like and what they don't like, I like to give them a few options with the picture like Ava had mentioned, and overlay a few of the edge to edges so that they can get a sense and say yes or no, and involve them. I agree. It's a trust thing. It's such a trust thing, and you have to have a relationship that way, and there has to be communication, like Vita also alluded to. It's a back and forth, right? This is their piece. This isn't about me. This is about, just making their piece better. And it's not about showcasing necessarily my quilting, right? It's making sure that their quilt speaks to them and is used for its intention. And so, yeah.
So Angela, you're saying that you show them it
Mhm.
overlaid over an imported picture. Then do you send them a PDF? Are you showing them this in real time with your computer? How do you do that?
If they're here, of course, I'm doing it in real time for them.
Okay.
But if I have clients that I'm communicating with via email, then I export the image right out of Creative Studio, and I believe it's JPEG, so it's a nice small file, and send it to them that way in email, so that they have a few different versions. If I don't have an image, Kayla, then I'll send them a picture of just the size of the quilt with the edge to edge. I kind of size it based on their quilt with the grid on in the background, so that they can say, and I'll say, you know, that's set to 1 inch or whatever, so you can have an idea of density as well without the image. So
I'd
I do
like to
something
throw a question out there in regards to our topic. So, how do you deal with clients that are very involved in the process and they go online and they find patterns that they want on their quilt, right? And I had one that did this 3 times in a row, and of course I didn't have the pattern. And I have a hard time, saying, okay, I'll get this pattern, you pay for it, and now it's mine. I kind of feel bad about that. But where do you draw the line when it comes to that?
I don't feel bad about it at all. Do it all the time.
Yeah.
I think it's a preference thing. One of the things that I do, I think that's different than what I've heard so far on this Node Nerds, is all of my customers, I send them to the internet. Go to Pinterest, go to the long arm digitized design flowers or whatever you're looking for, and you get lost in all those thousands and thousands of patterns and find the one that speaks to you. And then screenshot me a couple that you like. And chances are I probably have it or have one that's close enough. And if it has to be, that daisy, because that's the perfect daisy, then we split the cost. So if it's $15, I tack on $7.50 at the end. And then everybody wins. Most of the time, I don't have to buy the pattern. Now, that said, I have a couple customers who want that pattern. And then I have to take it the next step, what Angela does, and show them the density, because sometimes they're not thinking in density, or they see something that's very linear that's going to take 12 hours to quilt, and they're not understanding how that will work on their quilt. So then I will take it the next step. But for 90% of my customers, I send them to the internet. Go find me pictures that you like that speak to you, so that I can understand where your head is. And then once I have that knowledge, then we can do the real stuff of what's actually going to happen on their quilt. So that's how all of my edge to edge conversations start usually, is by sending them out there to the internet. And I always say that if you find something you absolutely love, I'll split the cost with you of the pattern if I don't have it already. And nobody has ever been funny about that.
No.
Vita, did you have something to say on that too?
Well, so I have quilts that are mailed to me, and those are usually Judy Niemeyer quilts, right? So there's something really specific they're looking for. But I also have three shops now in town that do quilt intake for me. So I'm not there when they're dropping off their quilt. They're filling out a form, and then they're telling me that they want, this price edge to edge, or this price edge to edge, or they're wanting a pattern to boundary with custom borders, or whatever it is that they're wanting. And then sometimes they'll put whatever you think, or they'll say, I want something geometric or flowery or no feathers. They'll put notes in there, and then I'm picking it up and bringing it home. And if they're a new client, then I'm picking up the phone and I'm calling them to say hello and introduce myself and talk about what the next step should be, because the communication, like we've said, is really important. And then I give them the option. Do you want me to mock something up and show you what this edge to edge is going to look like? I have a few patterns in mind, and so being able to do the screenshot, being able to mock it up for them is invaluable, because then we can show them what it's going to look like. And then occasionally people will opt to bring their quilt directly to me, in which case we go in the studio and I take the measurements and do all the stuff. And then I put it in and mock it up on the screen for them so that they can see what it's going to look like. So All of those
So-
things work. It just depends on the situation.
Let me ask this for you all. Give me a little raise of hands if you print your patterns and show them that way, your clients. Am I the only one that does that? Okay, so let me ask this. How many of you show them right on your stitcher in person?
If they're here.
If
yes.
they're
Okay.
Yep.
How many of you meet clients outside of your home, like I do, and bring your SAM computer with you and show them in real time? A few of you. Tucker, what do you do? Do you have clients?
They
Sorry.
trust him implicitly. They just mail him quilts and drop them off. They're like, do whatever.
Do you prep it on your own end and then send them a PDF of options? How do you do it?
There's two ways. The majority of my client base is mail-in, right? So, you know, and of course, just like most of you all, they're like, do whatever you want. I can't do that. I don't want to put the wrong design on your quilt and have to spend the rest of my life ripping these stitches out, right? So what I do is I have that catalog and that file saved in my computer of what they like and what they don't like. So I go through my patterns and I put the patterns that I feel would be, adequate for that quilt in my project. And once I get, 5 or 6 patterns in my project tab, I print a catalog off of just my project tab
So you
and
do
email
print
it to
them. Okay, you do print them. I'm not the only one.
email them.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
email
right.
them.
Okay.
But and then, if even so, if they want to see, scale or density, then I do, bring it into Creative Studio and do the mock-up and, send them a screenshot of that information.
So
Mhm.
what I'm hearing is because Creative Studio is so user friendly, you just click that out and show them briefly.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
don't know if all of you out there know how to do that, but I can do a screen share real quick if you want to see how I quickly do it. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah, that's a
Okay.
good idea.
So I'll do a screen share and I'll bring up my Creative Studio here. And let's just pick this edge to edge. So I have the edge to edge function brought up. I like to use the edge to edge function because it's quick and that's what we're trying to do in front of our clients. And I'm not anyway, I'm not trying to show my clients all the things that I can do because as some of you know, you don't necessarily want them to know all the things you can do, right? So when I bring this up, it says that I need to start clicking with my prompts. Click the upper left corner, click the upper right corner. I can't necessarily do that because I don't have my machine head and I don't have the physical quilt in front of me. So what I'll do is I will change my grid size to say 10. And we'll say that this is a twin quilt, a 60-inch quilt. So I throw my snaps on to the grid and then I just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that gives me my 60-inch width. And then I'll come down about 20 because of my throat space. And I'll just be able to very quickly click that out. Then I come over and add my length of 80. And then it will pre-populate my pattern in. And then I can try out audition separate patterns from there for my client for them to see. Is that a really brief introduction of how you can very quickly show your clients some other patterns right in front of them so it's quick and easy? Is there anything else, team, that I'm missing that I should probably show them here?
Yeah, what about the again button so that they can see?
Okay.
You can have a few tabs open so that you can go back.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I can
have
click
a
the again
side-by-side
button.
view that way.
When you do this though, you have to re-click out your points again. So you have to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Unless you do it in repeat patterns, then you don't have to.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm showing right now in the edge to edge function.
I know. I'm just saying for my actual clients, I prefer to use the repeat for that reason.
Right. And again, it comes down to one of those things, what are you most comfortable with? Because
Yep.
I will tell a little bit of an embarrassing story. Whoops, let me add in my length here. I will say that when I had a client into my house, I was so flustered. I had this at a 1-inch grid. I kid you not. I was counting every single inch. My brain stopped functioning, right?
We've
And
all been
I
there, Kayla.
We've all done
know.
it.
So it's things that we do, but the more you know, the more you can correct and move forward.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
anything else on choosing a pattern for a client? What I'm understanding is it's yes, based on your relationship with your client. We also have the option of looking at the quilt and seeing what we see in it, via either is it the piecing, or is it the color, or is it the fabric actually shown, the designs in the fabric. But I think most importantly, it depends on knowing your client, right?
Yeah.
And having that
It's okay
relationship.
to say no too. It's really okay. Like if they have a pattern that's just wrong and you can't bridge the gap. And that's happened to me a couple times. I've just said, you know, this isn't something I'm willing to put my name on if you want that. Because at the end of the day, these quilts go to guilds, they go to shows, they hang on walls, and there people will say, who did the quilting?
Yeah.
And so if it's something that's really wrong for the quilt, it's not for you. And it's okay to say no.
I agree.
I think in addition to that, it's also good to know your limitations for the same,
Yeah.
right? So if you're just starting out, some of those deeply nested new modern patterns, you know, don't create extra frustration for yourself until you get comfortable. It's a lot more fun that way. Just stay within what you're comfortable, and then that'll all come. That experience all comes. And again, it's okay to say no if you're not comfortable in where you're at yet as a quilter. And then you appreciate that. That's part of the trust and the honesty thing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all that being said, thank you, team, for hanging out with us and being on the Node Nerds episode. Thank you all for joining us and watching, listening in. If you have any comments or something you want us to speak more closely to, please feel free to add a comment for us, and we'll get to you with some of that. But thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Have fun.